Hi, this is Julie Anixter, and I'm so excited to welcome everybody to our current Fiberworks Then and Now session, From Tapestry to Fiber Art, a look at the Lausanne Biennales, which is going to be really fun. We've been working on it diligently for the last couple of months, and I know you're going to enjoy it. One quick note, we are recording this session. It would be great if everybody could stay on mute, please. We will have a chat going. Feel free to enter comments in the chat or questions. We'll have a discussion at the end. And this is being recorded for YouTube, so you'll be able to share it. And with that, here is our agenda. I am delighted to be able to now introduce all of these incredible people, starting with Gyongy Laky, my friend and mentor. Gyongy, over to you.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here. I'm sending greetings from Carmel, California, where Tom and I grew up. We're here for a little visit, but I did record some comments, which you will hear in a moment and then later on. This is a very interesting subject. We're going to be talking about very prestigious, magnificent, large exhibitions that happened for a little over 30 years in Lausanne, Switzerland. And remarkably, many of us young artists in Berkeley and San Francisco area showed our works. We were selected for the exhibitions when we were beginning. It was quite exciting meeting artists from all the world. So let's begin. I have a little introduction. Thank you. Founded in 1961, the International Center for Ancient and Modern Tapestry merged two big collections. In French, it's referred to as CITAM, Centre International de la Tapisserie Ancienne et Moderne. The first exhibition was in 1962 at the Musée Cantonal des Beaux-Arts in Lausanne, Switzerland. The Fondation Thomas Pauly houses the textile collections, including works of most of the artists who were in the biennials. Its archives include more than 8,000 artists. I urge you to read the 2017 book, From Tapestry to Fiber Art, produced by former director of the Fondation, Giselle Eberhard Cotton, and the current director, Magali Junet. It will delight and inspire you. I was very pleased to find my piece, That Word, on page 17. The 1960s and early 70s were stimulating, exhilarating, intense, and often volatile. As Kenneth Trapp, curator of the Renwick Museum, stated in his introduction to my oral history at the Bancroft Library, rebellion was in the air, on the airwaves, in the streets, and in the classrooms. And Debra, Susan, Lynn, Leah, and I were graduate students at UC Berkeley at that time. In 1971, Debra was the first among us to be in the Lausanne Biennials. Very exciting. The fifth of these prestigious exhibitions. I, however, missed Debra's participation. I was in India for that year on a UC Berkeley postgraduate program. After returning, I opened the doors of Fiberworks in spring of 1973. Debra, Susan, and Lynn joined me in teaching. Leah was active later, as were Pat and Lillian. In 1978, the year I joined the faculty at UC Davis, Susan Marie joined us, arriving at Fiberworks as one of our MFA students. Recent research by Canadian artist Ruth Schuing, mentioned in the book, noted that the Banff Centre in British Columbia played a major role in the biennials when Mariette Rousseau-Vermette initiated fiber interchange in the late 1970s. Earlier, in the summer of 1973, after opening Fiberworks, I had been invited to the Banff Center to teach in their textiles program. I proposed and taught their very first sculptural art textile course. Other Fiberworks artists followed me, Nance O'Banion and then Lynn, who had moved to Canada. Fiberworks attracted many people, many creative people. Immersed in that community, we were, however, captivated by what was going on internationally. In 1978, Fiberworks, led by artist Wendy Kashua, organized the International Symposium on Contemporary Textile Art. Claude Richard, Secretary General of CITAM, on the left, was a panelist. From Tapestry to Fiber Art, acknowledged the importance of our symposium, mentioning that there were 500 participants, and surprisingly, they came from 8 different countries. Keynote speakers were Magdalena Abacanovich, Sheila Hicks, and Joanne Branford. The following year, I was invited by Claude to talk at the 1979 biennial. I had lived in France in 1963 and 4, and I was fairly fluent in French by 1979. However, it turned out I did not know the word in French for process. I had to improvise as I spoke about art in California, the US, and about my own work. Regardless, the response was positive, as you can see. I will be speaking more about my participation later. Thank you.
Thanks, Ginge. You know, each of the women that we're going to hear from today are such multifaceted, multi-talented artists. They defy description. And with that, I would like to introduce my friend, Debra Rapoport, who many of you know. And if you don't, you're in for a treat. Debra, unmute and over to you.
So 1971, I was accepted into the 5th biennial in Lausanne at the Museum Cantonal. And I had presented my work to Jack Leonard Larson and Mildred Constantine, who were on the committee. And I was making fibrous raiments, you know, kind of environmental pieces for the body. And later on in Craft Horizons, Jack Leonard Larson wrote, "We thought we'd adore it, but goddamn, she wore it." And so it was the first time a tapestry was ever worn at the Biennale. And the headlines read, "Tapisserie Vivante, Living Tapestry." And so I wore it at the opening. And next slide, please. So it was a fibrous raiment with conical appendages. It was just made from mundane rope. And here I am wearing it in the Biennale in 1971. And my photographer's wife, who was wearing it in the other photograph. That's the photograph I used for publicity. And as they said, as Jack Larson said, "We thought we'd adore it, but goddamn, she wore it." So here we are, Tapisserie Vivante, the first time a tapestry in the Biennale was ever worn. Okay, next. And these, I guess, are 2 events that happened at Fiberworks in, I think, about 74, but there are other things that happened before that. Next. So this was 73, which was really the 6th Biennale that Susan Wick and I did a collaboration. And this photograph is the piece that we presented to the committee. And the piece was called Fleeceworks 3. Okay, next. And the piece was about 8 feet tall and 15 feet wide. And it was all fleece, naturally dyed. I was living in a community where we had lots of fleece, so I had hundreds of pounds of fleece available to me. Susan was living down in Mountain View, and she had access to Montalvo Art Center, and she could get as much botanical material as necessary. And we spent weeks getting together, dyeing this fleece, not knowing exactly how we were going to assemble it. But after we dyed it, we stuffed it in finger knitting, fish line, clear plastic fish line tubes. And then all those tubes became like a linear element that we assembled together to make this very large piece. I wish I had some pictures of us trying to pack it to ship it. And anyway, we really had a fabulous time. And that was 1973. Next. This, I guess, was 73 also, when Susan and I did a live-in in Fiberworks, I think shortly after it opened. We lived in the gallery for a week. Next. And here we are just doing our thing 50 plus years ago, hanging out, I think we cooked, we ate, we made stuff. Next, invited everybody in for tea, invited the community in to share the experience with us. And it was just fun sleeping there. I think we did a piece of cabbage leaves or lettuce leaves on the wall. Suddenly that's coming to me, and just allowed it to deteriorate and change its form and become altered aged. Next. And here was somebody invited. Next. And this was at some event, you know, dressed the way I love to dress, with a wool mop around my neck and cuffs made out of dishwashing cloths at Fiberworks. Next. And then Baker, Rapoport, and Wick started to collaborate in 74. And I don't even remember what we did at this piece, but obviously it was in 76 after we got our NEA grant, and we went to New York and we traipsed around New York and we were photographed, which you'll see in some of the next photographs. Next. So this was a photograph. We accidentally ventured into a vintage store, and as luck would have it, the New York Times, Chester Higgins Jr., who was a photographer for the Times then, said, "I've come to cover a story on this shop, and being that you three women are here, we're just going to have to dress you up and photograph you." So that's what he did. And he also followed us around for the next few days, being that we had our NEA grant. And I don't even remember what the panel was that we talked about that, but it was May 12th and 13th, an afternoon conversation. Okay, next. And then this was the 7th Biennale that in 75 that I did a piece called Textured Layered Grid, and it was handmade felt and I think some handmade paper and sausage casings that I got from the big sausage company in downtown San Francisco, and then wire grid. So it was, I love grid. So this was layering of that. Okay, next. So here's the piece. Here's me installing it last minute, fixing up the grid that also had plastic vinyl on top of it. And there you see the finished piece. And that was 75. And that's it.
Debra, gorgeous. Thank you so much. And so much fun to see you and Susan and Baker. Over to my colleague at the MFA program, Susan Marie Johnson.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here today, and I hope you enjoyed the video I did talking about my process. Thanks. I first heard of the Biennale of Tapestry in 1973 when I was a student at the University of Wisconsin at River Falls with Walter Nottingham. I was 25 at the time. This is where I discovered Magdalena Abakanovich's artwork, which inspired me for years. I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, received a BS degree in art education from the University of Minnesota in 1970, and was currently showing my artwork in national and international juried shows. I taught art in junior high and high schools for 7 years before I worked on my MFA degree in textile arts at Fiberworks from 1977 to 79. This is a photograph of the graduate students in my program and our graduate seminar leader, the conceptual artist David Ireland. I was very fortunate that David also agreed to be my graduate thesis advisor and worked closely with me in critiquing my work. I was particularly interested in the idea of obsessive repetition in my process of working. I took the idea of an obsessively repetitive element, 22-gauge steel wire, and worked in a scheduled 40 hours a week. The sculpture that resulted from this idea became my graduate school body of work. I met Claude Richard at the Fiberworks Symposium, and after seeing my work, she encouraged me to send in a proposal for the next Biennale. I sent in 8 slides and a sample steel wire ball. These were the 7 slides of my current work. There's 4 elements. $20 elements. $63 elements. They were all created in 1979. The A slide was a sample of my proposed artwork floor cover. My proposal was accepted, and I was thrilled to be included in the 10th Annual Biennale. This is a detail of the finished piece. The installed piece measures 5 inches high by 10 feet long by 8 feet wide and is made of steel wire. The piece floor cover evolved out of my working process. I usually start out with an idea and respond to the working process, incorporating any accidents encountered along the way. These were the logistical problems to consider in designing this piece. It needed to be strong enough to hold attention in the large, ornate space of the museum. It also needed to be something that I could ship and install easily. Making 532 hand-sized steel wire balls became my answer. These steel wire balls were displayed directly on the floor. This references the idea that art doesn't belong on a pedestal. As well, this piece then becomes a large rug on the floor, but it can't be walked upon. Yet the steel wire balls look like balls of yarn that are ready to be woven, crocheted, or knitted. This piece very much contains my concerns and inspirations from the worlds of textile arts, sculpture, and conceptual art. It was very interesting to notice that at times when I glanced at the piece, it reminded me of the plowed fields and the black earth of my grandparents' farm in Minnesota. And at other times, the steel wire balls reminded me of my mother's balls of yarn that were present in my childhood home that she used while knitting or crochet. Leah Cook generously helped me out with the next hurdles of figuring out how to deal with the shipping, the insurance, and the customs broker for the artwork. My artwork had gotten into the show, but attending the show was another matter. It was 1981, and I had $10,000 in graduate school loans and was working a $6 an hour job. I quit my tenured art teaching job in Minnesota so that I could live in San Francisco. I was able to find $1,200 to pay for my plane ticket, Europass, and food for 14 days. While on this trip, friends of the foundation, Thomas Pauly, Patricia Townsend, and Nancy Marchant, graciously arranged free places for me to stay in Lausanne, Paris, and Amsterdam. During the opening of the Biennale, there were many events and shared meals. The most memorable was a boat trip on Lake Geneva with the artists and the press. The first time I saw France was on this boat, and the Swiss cheese and the Swiss chocolate are memorable to this day. This trip was the first time that I was in Europe. It was a wonderful and educational experience. Seeing buildings that were hundreds of years old in all the cities made me realize how young the United States is. I also felt valued as an artist by the Europeans that I met. They have such a sense of history and the role that art plays in it. I made several friends at the show. Mark Venho and his wife invited me to their home in Flanders, Belgium. I had dinner with Sue Ellen Glashauser and her family in Paris. Many showing opportunities opened up to me. Karen Hansen and I had a 2-person show in Nevers, France. Geller Gallery at Kyoto, Japan gave me a 1-person show. Counting is the name of the piece that I showed in Japan. It was a continuous tape recording of me counting my steel wire balls. By the time this opportunity presented itself, my finances had absorbed another $2,200 to pay for shipping my Biennale piece back and forth from the show. Unfortunately, there was no way that I could afford to send floor cover or myself to Japan for the show. I had been wanting to enlarge my visual vocabulary by learning traditional metalworking skills. In 1981, I met sculptor Dave Holzenbach, who let me work at his metalworking studio several years in order to learn these skills. I then set up my own studio in San Francisco, which continues to this day. Here are slides of a few of my sculptures. New Tools number 7, 1986. Wrap Steel, 1989. Rolled Steel, 1990. Bent Steel, 1990. In 2016, the Foundation Thomas Pauly included my work in the Tapestry Nomads 20th Century Collection show in Lausanne, Switzerland, which I attended with my husband, Dave Holzenbach. In 2022, the Foundation Thomas Pauly acquired my piece floor cover for their permanent collection.
I have to say, listening to this, Susan and everyone, you guys are not just artists, you're entrepreneurs. You know, all the things you had to do to make the work happen is just really amazing. And I just wanted to say, too, that it was nice to see a picture of myself from that era. That's me on the right with my hand in my pocket. Those were such great days at Fiberworks. Thanks to all of you. Okay, onwards. Thank you, Susan. That was lovely. To Lynn Mauser-Bain. Lynn, please say a few words.
Hi. Susan, I just loved seeing that work. So I wanted to say just a few words before I show the video. And I want to just talk about the exhibition that Ginge is in now that is called Beauty as Resistance. And to go to the gallery, Tom Grata and Rhoda Brown's gallery, because the statement of that is so extraordinary and relevant today. And I went online to look at Janet Bogich's wide angle consulting. And I went, oh, Julie's through line, Janet's wide angle, those are all concepts from Fiberworks. And I want to just explain that I think that Fiberworks has always represented resistance. And I'm so grateful for all of the support forever from Fiberworks. And I want to thank everybody for being here. Thanks. On to my video.
Hello, Fiberworks. Ginge, Julie, I'm so grateful that you're making this possible. I love the fact that you're still continuing to grow Fiberworks. I think that's so extraordinary. All of the people that I have known through Fiberworks have had an immense influence, inspiration on my whole life. Before I talk about the Biennales, and I'm so grateful to be here to talk about them, I wanted to talk a little bit about the history that led me to be accepted into the 11th and the 13th Biennale. In 1970, I was in Stockholm at Konstfackskolan on a Fulbright, and when I get home in 73, Ginge is just beginning to organize Fiberworks, and we had the most extraordinary conversations that were really fun about her vision. And then I moved to Canada. And in 1983, Ginge comes to the Banff Center and teaches the very first fiber sculpture class. And in Ginge's generosity, she introduces me to the people at the Banff Center, and they end up hiring me. I was teaching silkscreen printing at the beginning, and Mariette Rousseau-Vermette from Quebec was teaching an architectural weaving class, how to get architectural commissions. She had represented Canada in the Biennale. She had woven a curtain that was installed as Canada's gift to the United States at the Kennedy Center. Her class was absolutely beloved. Patterson Sims at the Whitney, who came to Banff often, said that he came because of Mariette's magic spirit. At first, the Banff Center was afraid to ask her to be head of the department. We were both teaching courses. I convinced the administration to offer Mariette the position of being head to the department, which thank God she accepted. And she brought in all these friends of hers, Magdalena Bakanovich, Sheila Hicks, Ritzy and Peter Jacoby. So when I've been talking about Mariette, you might be thinking that I'm only talking about the historical, but really I'm talking about what's current. Mariette influenced Tom Grata and Rhoda Brown to collect and promote textiles. So we can see that her influence is very much alive today. I was in my studio pouring wax into very thin sheets and laying them on lines that went from wall to wall. And I took it into a gallery and the wax sagged, not at all my vision. So I removed the wax and had these lines wall to wall. And that's how I got into making threads and lines that went from wall to wall in a space. In 1983, I made a maquette of a staircase and I titled the piece Mirage. In Lausanne, I had it out of gold Lurlex thread, stretched taut. And what I liked about the gold thread is that it reflected light very much within the keeping of the idea of the illusion of a hierarchy. The Biennales were started by curators and people who still have foundations, the Paul Lee Foundation in Lausanne, only 17 years after the end of World War II. Think what that meant for these collectors to make it possible for Magdalena Bakanovich and Ritzy and Peter Jacoby behind the Iron Curtain to have their work supported. That vision couldn't be more relevant today in our need for an international art community of fiber artists. In the 11th Biennale, one of my absolutely favorite pieces was by this young Japanese artist, Maki Nakagawa. And what I loved about her piece, and I call it a performance, although it wasn't officially a performance because only a few people were in the room to see her do this. She unzips her backpack and she brings out a bundle. The bundle's about this big, and guidelines go from one wall into the corners of a really big space, and it just unfurls. And in the unfurling, there were little bundles that she had wrapped coils impeccably. That craftsmanship was just out of this world. And the whole piece just unfurled out of her backpack. It was magnificent. So in 1984, I leave Canada and I come back to the United States. Ginge wonderfully, generously wrote me a letter of recommendation to teach at San Jose State, and I got the job. In 87, the theme was to return to the wall, and my maquette was titled Dream Portals Slip Behind the Wall, and I always thought that my maquette was accepted because of the title. I had roofing paper, I had industrial brass woven cloth, I had a ladder put into a silk sack, and I had a big veil of silk with a burned edge, and I'm still in love with the ideas of a portal, a dream, or images that I have carried through in my life as an artist, the portal, the veil, ash at the very edge. In the 13th Biennale, there was a performance that was possible because the curator, Erika Illiter, who is this extraordinary curator, author, and historian, had invited a theater troupe either from Belgium, Switzerland, or France, and they were families, and they had young children, like maybe 6, 7, 8, who wore wedding dresses. And this troupe of families paraded through the different galleries of the museum, and they just laid down. What was magnificent about it was the staging, the costuming. And if I say that it had references that I now would think that were like Pina Bausch's work, you would know how magnificent this performance was. I'm going to take the rest of my time and just talk about some of the things that I do that I think are fun. This is actually indigo on paper, and I'm in love with taking mops and just drawing on big pieces of paper. This is a painting that I did that's 8 feet by 6 feet. I have titled it Am, as in I am, and in some kind of a manifesto, I am. And I also really like taking the word AM and reversing it to being M-A, ma. As I understand it, that's Japanese for time and space. So I paint in layers and layers and years, and I cover up and I sand down and I scrape and I cover, lots of experimenting going in. But mostly what I probably do in excavating out is that I also hide and cover up. And so this painting is very much about what's embedded and what are the memories embedded in it.
This is, again, so moving and so great to see. And Lynn, we've captured it for all time here. So thank you so much for doing this. Now it's Ginge's talk on the Biennale.
I was in the 14th Biennale, and that was also a time when Leah was in it, and you'll hear from her. And I'd just like to tell you about the experience of making a large piece and sending it to Lausanne. Thank you. Please roll. I was thrilled to be selected for the 14th Biennial in Lausanne in 1989. And here you'll see my 5-inch high maquette for my proposal, which I anticipated and proposed would be 7.5 feet high. Well, that was quite a feat, and it was quite a feat to find the materials. But I did. It was pruning season, fortunately, and on my drives to the University of California at Davis, I was able to gather quite a bit of material and also to gather enormous respect for farm laborers because of the hot and dusty conditions. It turned out it was indeed a big project. And fortunately, my wonderful artist friends and other friends were enthusiastic enough to drop by and help now and then. This is jeweler Bob Jefferson, along with photographer John Friedman, stopping by to give a hand. It was a supportive community. And here you see Sherry Ma. She was particularly good at finding the right twig for the right space and often stopped by to see how things were going. My San Francisco neighbors helped help move the big pieces, each letter into the garage. There, David Kippy was making a big box. It amazed me as I prepared my comments for today that the idea was to put the R in the box, put the T into the R, and then in pieces, put the A around those two letters to be assembled in the museum. How could we have thought of that? But the people in the museum were wonderful, and here I am. They even helped hang up the A on those two structures so that I could work on it and put it back together again. And of course, again, it was a community participation project. There's my brother, Matt Laky from Portland, Oregon, with his son, Mario, who was brilliant at helping out. Finally, it was done, and there it was in the gallery, and I suddenly saw how tiny it was. But it was ready for the opening, and it did appeal to the publications because, of course, art, and this is an art venue. So we got some nice coverage there. You'll see my nephew on the left and another, and here on the right, even one published in Greece. Actually, the piece went to Textile Museum in Tilburg, Holland, and then it came back to the U.S. I don't know how it got into a box, but it did. It came back to the U.S. and it was exhibited in several places here. Its resting place now is in the Federal District Court collection for the Northern District of California Historical Society, and you'll find it on the 17th floor of the Philip Burton Courthouse here on Golden Gate Avenue. Thank you very much, and Julie, thank you. You're doing a wonderful job bringing us together. I know it's all voluntary on your part and everyone else's, and it's a delight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginge. And it is my pleasure to introduce Leah Cook. I think many of you know Leah, but it's been wonderful for me to be able to spend time with her again. So Leah, over to you.
Okay, so we're going to go through the slides pretty quickly, and I'm just going to talk spontaneously. This is me on my piece at the Lausanne Biennial in 1973. That was sixth biennial, I believe. And it was, I guess what I wanted to say is that during this time, and even years earlier, I was meeting with a group of female artists, and we did a lot of community sharing of ideas, travel. It was a wonderful group, and really, Fiberworks evolved out of this, people like Ginge and so forth. Anyway, Fiberworks evolved out of it, but it was this group. They were former students of Ed Rosbach, and they were, taught to be, open and experimental and do what you want and don't do what the art historians tell you to do, all of that stuff. So anyway, move on. Next. And this was done in 1975, and I was very interested in the relationship between weaving and photography. And the first piece with parallel lines had to do with optical illusions, but actually physically woven. And in this case, this is iron silver printing, so it's a 19th century early photography process where you take big, huge negatives or positives and expose them to the sun and develop the work. So it's called iron silver printing. But the reason I'm talking about that next is this is the Lausanne Biennial, the next one in 1975. And this piece also, space-dyed photographic weaving, again, it was woven on the loom, with these optical illusions, but then it was coated in areas with iron silver process, and it was all done process-wise related to photography. Next one. And around 1975, I just put this up because I did a workshop at Fiberworks, and I was, connected to Fiberworks, but also busy teaching elsewhere. And but in this case, I did a workshop on this iron silver processing. Next slide. Okay, so this was the third biennial that I was in, and not the third biennial, it's the eighth biennial, sixth, seventh, eighth, yes, 1973, 75, 77, yeah. And this was spatial ecot, so I did a lot of dyeing, which again, you could see the optical building of threads, which was all woven on the loom, hand beaten by hand, very physical process. But it changed the pattern. So the way the dyeing and the painting related to the pattern, I was interested in continual pattern that continually changed and was not repetitive. So next one. This is more about looking at weaving imagery built like a photographer with particles of color, only had particles of thread. Next. And here you can see the way it's woven on a loom to build the image. Next one. And this piece here was done, again, I was weaving, I wasn't doing jacquard at this moment. I was weaving a surface that was put into water and pressed flat. And then each thread was painted separately. So the optical or the pointillist way of using the threads to create new image, and yet the woven image is in the background. So it's continually changing, but you can see what the detail is. Next slide. I became really interested in the textile as subject matter because I kept seeing in all the paintings in Europe, like this one from England, drapery everywhere, but never the subject matter. Cloth was never the subject. It was always the female face or the arm or the hand, but not cloth. So I wanted to make it a subject matter. So on the left-hand side is a series of curtain pieces I did. You see the curtain as the object. And again, it also has motion and pattern that I'm interested in, how motion and pattern change. Next. This one was I was in the biennial, the 14th biennial. This was in 1989, so quite a few years later. But this is again this is called Drapery Frieze after Leonardo. So it came from Leonardo da Vinci drapery paintings, details which were repainted and woven and processed. So that was one of them among a number of theories. The next one. This is another piece, an installation called Material Pleasures. And in this one, you get to see the drapery as subject matter. Some of them are male artists and some are female artists, like Gyongy. Anyway, but you also begin to see the body touching the fabric, the foot touching the fabric touching on the body. So I became really interested in the touch of fabric and how when we look at artwork that's woven, we get a whole nother response to it than if we saw it as a painting or drawing, because you get this tactile memory experience. Move on. Again, so I did a series of pieces. Again, the weaving is these little hands, but the painting itself and the painting part of the weaving, it's all woven in the end. But anyway, it again relates to the touch of fabric on the body. Next. Here's another one. And finally, next. So I began working with neuroscientists to study this sensation and perception. It was on the cover of this book, but I worked together with a number of neuroscientists to do research on comparing a photo and a woven of the same photo of a face and a woven of the face. And what is the difference in our response in the brain, and also doing imaging in the brain itself. Okay, next. This is jacquard. I always became very interested in what is the possibility, what could jacquard do to create imagery and weaving, because so far when you just use a regular loom, it's always a little repeat pattern that goes over and over and over the same. Whereas with jacquard, every thread is different. You can have punch cards. And so I did a lot of research on jacquard before there was anything digitally available. Next. So that's jacquard of jacquard. This is the punch cards, a sample of one of the early punch cards. About 1883, excuse me, the punch cards, jacquard went into production and, of course, caused a lot of problems in the textile industry for the workers. Next. So this is, I brought, that's a picture of a jacquard loom. And this is not the loom itself, but I brought everything from England here to actually create it myself. And I also brought an 1823 jacquard mechanism from France. So I was really trying to experiment. In the end, the punch cards weren't terribly practical. It's, because once things became digitally available, then there became much more immediate response to change in what you wanted to do. And you didn't have to go out and punch cards and do all that. Next. And so this is example of what I had to do thread by thread before the cards got punched and it could be woven. Next. And so then I got available the TC1 loom from Norway, and Vibeke Vesby was the one that invented this. And it was wonderful because it wasn't like a factory that you were weaving in. You could actually weave on the loom in your studio, and you could create any kind of image you wanted. In this case, just based on black and white, but also in color too. Next. And I'm just going to go through a number of pieces. That draped one was based on video stills from touch of fabric, and then it's woven and then actually hung up. It's three-dimensional. This was done for the federal government in a courthouse, and this is the woven images based on the pixelated color. And also these kids looking at you in the courthouse, which was interesting. Next. And you can just go through some of these because, it's just, I'm just showing kind of details of what I did during that process. And finally, this is my studio here today in the present. So you can see that I'm really involved with plants and fibers and involved with creating my immediate response to my immediate environment. After doing all this research for so long, I'm much more interested now in the immediate. So that's it.
Wow. Leah, thank you so much. That was really thrilling. And now, Pat, over to you.
Here we are, Lillian Elliott on the left and me on the right. This is 40 years ago, working in our shared studio, which was above Pacific Basin School of Textile Art on San Pablo Avenue in Berkeley. We worked on our collaborative work one day a week, never on the same piece at the same time, until what we created for Lausanne. An image of this piece, Nomad, was submitted in our application for the 12th biennial when the theme was textiles as sculpture in 1985. Before that, this international exhibition had shown contemporary tapestry on the wall.
We proposed that we would enlarge this basket in relation to the exhibition gallery room height dimensions at the Museum of Fine Arts in Lausanne. There were 716 applicants that year, with 50 selected. Our studio was way too small for building this large basket, so my dining room at home became our studio space for months. Here is Lillian inside the basket, creating the reed structure. And a close-up detail of the painted structure with its skin membrane sausage casings. I had figured out how to cover large areas with my material, building scaffolds, when the reeds were too far apart for easy attachment. We couldn't order the hickory bark we planned to use, as it was too cold for harvesting in Iowa that winter. When we needed that material, so we simulated by painting dark bands of hickory. To get the basket out my front door and for shipping to Switzerland, we had to cut this large vessel into sections. Marcia Donahue's pickup truck and next door neighbors helped us load the cut sections for transport to Fiberworks. Fiberworks Gallery provided a space for us to have a trial run, to rebuild the sculpture as we needed a run through before doing this for the first time in Lausanne. The vessel was successfully reassembled at Fiberworks. The dimensions are 5 feet by 8 feet 2 inches by 7 feet. Afterwards, when we disassembled Romany, which we entitled it, we hung the separate cut sections on the wall and liked the results. We renamed this configuration whitewashed lines. And here's a detail of just 2 of those sections. Crates had to be built. It was no small task shipping to Switzerland what we'd created. And here is the sculpture as displayed at the Biennale. After creating this fiber sculpture in our own collaborative work, we decided to simplify our structures. I had learned, it seemed, how to cover the world with skin membrane. Our experience working in that scale for Lausanne changed our subsequent collaborative work. The sculpture located nearest ours on exhibit at that biennial was created by Katsuhiro Fujimura. These 2 classically shaped vessels were made of cut, affixed, piled slices of corrugated cardboard. There were 15 Japanese artist participants in the 12th biennial, dominating the exhibition that year. We were fascinated watching Fujimura build his sculpture. He was a master with his pre-cut sections, assembling them, creating an extraordinary monumental piece. Lillian and I identified with this Victorian image as we continued to collaborate for 11 years, creating our fiber sculpture. We had a good time, encouraging each other, and were brutally honest in our collaboration, talking a lot about what we thought worked or didn't work. Neither of us hesitated at the end of a day to say to the other, "I don't like what you've done." Our work was forgiving, and we could decide to cut it apart, remake it, or pitch it. As part of the exhibit Woven Histories, Textiles and Modern Abstraction, which originated at the National Gallery of Art and just closed at MoMA, here is our collaborative leaf basket, included in a case in good company with other baskets by Ed Rosbach, Dorothy Gilbarnes, and an individual sculptural basket by Lillian. I remain grateful to those whose influence I continue to appreciate and feel. And recent work of mine speaks of an agricultural tool. I call it winnow. I need it these days for sifting out what's true. And finally, here is ARG, communicating my personal outraged response to this moment in time.
Pat, Thank you so much for that. We'll have a bit of a discussion. Anybody want to ask a question or say anything?
Well, I'd like to say something. I'd like to say that I know all of you so well. This was absolutely fascinating, just wonderful, inspiring, and delightful. And it really plays out, Julie, your idea of Fiberworks then and now, because we're looking at things that were made in the 70s and 80s, and yet also understanding where people were able to move more recently, and that we're all still doing very creative work. It's deeply, deeply inspiring, and I want to thank all of you.
Yeah. Mm. Yes, amen.
Well, I'd like to thank Ginge for Fiberworks.
Yeah.
So putting us all here 50 years later. What a gift. Thank you.
I have a question to ask Leah. Okay.
Please.
Leah, I'm so interested in the neurology research that you've been doing about touch. When I was at San Jose State and got cremated politically, the head of the department said to me, "What's the value of textiles?" And so I also did neuro research. I'm so fascinated that you did neuro research. I mean, I love the fact that touch is one of the first sensations in the embryo. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'd be so curious about your information, about your research.
Yeah, well, I worked on it for at least 10 years. So, and I've met with a lot of different neuroscience and a lot of different projects. So if you
Oh,
want to communicate with me, you can email me and we can meet up because I do I do have a lot of information about that. Even though I've moved on, I'm not doing it now. It's still, a major part of my work, obviously.
I'm just saying that for all of us, the psyche and touch is so important to all of us, or we wouldn't be here. But thank you.
we might have to do a whole session on that, Leah. I think a lot of people would be interested in that. Callie, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just curious as to what is the most like what's your favorite material to use? I guess this speaks for everybody. Like I want to know like is it silk? Is it cotton? Is it linen? Because I'm fairly new to textile, work. I mean, I'm an artist, but that's not my form of art. So I was just kind of curious as to what type of material do you prefer to use since we're talking about touch and, physique and stuff like that.
And
I
let me,
can say exactly. I use rayon. Uh,
Rayon.
it was made in the 60s,
Hmm.
70s. It's no longer made in the US, but I have a lot of it, and it shrinks. You put it in water, you can press it down, and it remains flat. So it has a lot of tactile ability for work. So rayon. I use rayon. I
Okay.
have to dye it.
Cool.
Unfortunately, it takes a lot of water.
Interesting. All right.
and if you would answer that question in the chat, I think it'd be fascinating. What's your favorite material now, perhaps?
Mhm.
And I think, in the spirit of just keeping this moving, we have a few more things to say, and then we'll let you all go back to your afternoons. But I'm with you, Ginge. This has just been fascinating, hasn't it? Just gorgeous. So we wanted to give Callie and Mikhail just a moment to tell you about what they do, because without them, we would not be doing this series. So just briefly, Callie, just say hi, and Mikhail, I'm going to ask you to do the same if you're still around. So Callie, you go.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Kylie Johnson. I'm the producer for Fiberworks Then and Now. I first connected with Julie Anixter through Project Osmosis through Vernon Lockhart, and because I was doing a project for Cushman and Wakefield, and Julie was there, and we just hit it off. We just I shared with her some of the stuff I'm interested in, which is, graphic design, photography, videography, and I just love telling stories. And so she told me about Fiberworks, and I was interested to learn more, and here I am now. So if you have any like, initiatives or businesses or projects that you want to bring more attention to, because I am a creative director, so I would love to help you out with that. My contact is at the bottom, 773-358 0451, and along with my email. So I hope to hear from you.
And we will share this afterwards with everybody. And Mikhail, are you around still?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm on Lynn's Zoom. But hi everyone. I'm Makoa. I'm a video editor, a freelancer. So I work with a variety of clients and people like that on their videos. I worked with Ginge, Susan, and Lynn on their videos for this webinar. But yeah, I got introduced to fireworks through Ginge as my mother worked under her husband Tom when he was working in the Gerbode Foundation. So we've been working together here and there. I do like mostly like video editing, animation, graphic design as well. My demo reel is linked here if you want to see like a quick glimpse of like what I do. I think it'll also be emailed later, but I'm based in the Bay Area, Berkeley. So if any of y'all have like a project that you need like filmed or edited, I'm here to help. There's my number and email down here. But yeah, super great to be here. Super thankful that I've been able to work on all your projects and yeah.
Well, it's been wonderful to have you both. We couldn't have done it without you. So thank you, and we'll send out their info. And Callie, if you'll go to the next slide, I'm going to ask Ginge to say a few words.
Well, we put this at the end because it might bring some tears. We've had to say goodbye to a few dear friends, most recently Leslie Correll, who you see here, both then and more recently. And then also the wonderful staff at Fiberworks. There were other people, Mildred Howard and others, but these people, most recently Jan Gennaro and Sylvia 70, left us within the past year. So, with sadness in my heart, and I know in many of yours, we bid them goodbye and we'll remember them always. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginge. And then just in closing, I want to say thank you again to all of the artists who participated. We will have this video up as soon as we can at our YouTube channel. I thank Throughline for helping me produce this. Of course, Ginge, my partner in crime here. I'm with you, Susan Marie, like, thank God for Fiberworks, right? What a wonderful, wonderful part of all of our lives. And thank you to Callie and Mikhail and to all of you. So have a wonderful rest of the day. It was lovely to be with all of you, and thank you again.